So, in our continuation of the uh, attributes of love, in 1 Corinthians 13, we come to the third one. So far, we've talked about love is kind, love is patient, and on this one, we get to the one where it talks about love does not envy. And so it kind of, we enter into some new territory. This is a fairly dark study. And the more I studied it, the scarier it became as I began to realize some of the evil and dark things that have happened because of envy. And I don't really like to talk about those kind of things, but it's really important that I think we understand envy and how it works. Almost automatically, almost all of us would disqualify ourselves and say, yeah, I agree, we're not to be envious, but that's not me. And the sad thing is, as we go through this and we begin to study what envy really is, you may discover that you might have an issue with it because it comes out in really unusual ways, in ways that we might not expect. So, to our text, love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy. And that's in the NIV. New American Standard says it is not jealous. And the Greek word can be translated either as envy or jealous. And depending on the translation, it's about half one way, half the other. Probably a few more have envy, but basically it means the same thing. So, to love someone is to be genuinely happy for them when they have things that we can't have, when they've been blessed in ways that we have not, when they can do things we can't do. And when I say things, it's almost an unlimited list. I mean, careers, vacations, vehicles, houses, popularity, beauty, brains, happiness, you name it. There's a lot of things that, that people, we look around us and, people surpass us and they can do things and they have things. And the problem becomes whenever we, rather than being happy for them, which we should, instead, we are really not very happy with them. We're really not that happy with their success or whatever it is. And truth be told, and on this subject, it's rarely told because people are ashamed of this and they hide it even from themselves, but they're really kind of envious of some attribute of somebody's life. And the problem with it is this thing can fester and it can come out in ways that you wouldn't expect. So that's, first off, I wanted to just look at the secular dictionary version of envy, and this is part of the problem because according to the dictionary, there's two forms of it. There's a noun, which is a feeling of discontented or resentful longing aroused by someone else's possessions, qualities, or luck. And so, as an example, she felt a twinge of envy for the people, on board the plane, whatever. So notice how superficial this is. The verb form, desire to have quality possession or other desirable attribute belonging to someone else. He envied people who do not have to work on weekends, you know. So this is a part of the problem, because in our society and really how we've been conditioned is we see envy as kind of a superficial thing, you know. I'm envious of, you know, where they went on vacation, or maybe I take a vacation and I wish I'm kind of envious of the people that can live in Colorado or whatever, you name it. So we get to the biblical definition, and it's a much different thing. To start with, the exact word that is used in 1 Corinthians 13:4 is a verb. It's not a noun. And of course, as we know, a verb is an action. And so the problem with this kind of envy is we can see there at the bottom from Thayer's, it says to be heated or boiled, to be moved. So basically to try to do something. And so if you're envious with somebody's possessions, or you're envy with their job, or whatever it is, you don't try to take it away from them, but maybe you seek to undermine them in some way. So, of course, there's also a form of the same word that can be zealous, which we won't look at, but according to context, you know, the translators correctly picked envy in this 1 Corinthians 13:4. So, we're going to talk about 3 different things this afternoon, and one of them is the dangers of envy. And we're just going to briefly go through some of the things that makes it so deadly. And then we're going to go through 3 biblical examples of, I'm going to call it envy in action. There's actually a lot in the Bible, especially the Old Testament, about envy. And we're going to talk about 2 from the Old Testament and 1 from the New Testament. And what's shocking about these accounts is the things that people do because of envy. And then finally, we're going to talk about some safeguards against envy. I mean, it's a horrible thing, but the scripture is clear. There are a number of things that we can do that will protect us and safeguard us from this horrible tool that Satan has. So to start off with, in Proverbs 27:4, anger is cruel and wrath is like a flood, but jealousy is even more dangerous. Who would have guessed, you know? I mean, so anger is really bad, and wrath is like I think a longer version or a greater intensity of anger. But the thing about anger and wrath is they're usually spontaneous. But actions taken because of envy, in every example I found and everything I could think of, it was always premeditated. Murder is committed. There's a lot of planning and scheming involved with envy. So it's dangerous stuff. Proverbs 14:30, a heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. And depending on the translation, some translations use cancer. Envy is a cancer. And so one of the things about cancer is the worst kind of cancer is to find out that the cancer has grown and spread until it can no longer be treated. And, you know, maybe we discover we have stage 4 cancer. You know, it went through the previous 3 stages and gets to stage 4 and it spread throughout our body. So envy's just like that, because we may not realize we have it. And that's what makes it really, really dangerous, because it's possible to be envious and to think that, you know, I'm really not, you know, in your heart of hearts, you know, that, you know, you wish that you had this or that, but as far as you know, you're not taking any action on it. But let's look at some of the examples in a minute, and we'll see what some of these characteristics are. And this is the account that I'm going to talk about from the New Testament, which is, of course, Jesus. In Matthew 27:17, at his fake trial, therefore, when they had gathered together, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?" And notice this, it says, "For he knew that they had handed him over because of envy." So, do you think that, you know, the religious leaders, scribes and Pharisees, all the ones that were responsible for this mock trial and ultimately for crucifying Jesus, do you think they knew that they were envious? And I don't think they did. They did all kinds of wicked and evil things, and we're going to look at some of those in detail. But I don't think they really realized what was driving and what was motivating all their actions. It's like envy was the root thing. You know, Jesus would heal someone, and he would get there'd be a lot of people would hear about it. There'd be a big crowd. He got popular, and these religious leaders, that made them jealous. And so instead of, you know, they were religious leaders, and instead of doing what was right and becoming a disciple of Jesus, you know, listening to his teachings and everything, they were simply worried about their popularity. So they said, you know, we're going to kill him. I mean, early on, they set about the killing. So anyway, we'll get back to that later. So I want to talk a little bit about, just for a second, about blind spots. And one of the really interesting things about envy, okay, so you're driving down the road and you see somebody up in front of you and they change lanes and they about cut somebody off and they about get into an accident. Well, you're behind them and you can see what's going on, but they had a blind spot and they couldn't see it. So that's the thing about envy, is others can see it. Just like in Jesus' mock trial, whoever it was, Pilate, it said he knew, you know, and it's probably apparent to others as well, but yet that wasn't what they were brought to. You know, Jesus was brought to trial, they kept coming up with charges and everything, but envy was what was driving it all. So it's really scary to get cancer and not know you have cancer. So envy is just like that. And tonight we want to kind of lay it bare and lay it out there so we can kind of understand what some of the symptoms are. So this is kind of a lengthy reading. I probably have time. Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord, and Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel, and here was where the problem began, and his offering, but on Cain, his offering, he did not look with favor. So it made Cain mad. Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said, Cain, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you don't do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. Now Cain said to his brother Abel, let's go out to the field. While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, where is your brother Abel? I don't know. Of course, he lied. He replied, am I my brother's keeper? I have no idea what happened to him. The Lord said, what have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. So let's kind of go back from this and unpack it a little bit. So the Lord showed favor to Abel because he did what the Lord commanded him to do. And yet Cain decided to bring a different kind of an offering. He didn't do what the Lord commanded. So the Lord was not happy with him. He was happy with him or his offering. So instead of repenting and going back and correcting the problem, it just made him mad. So, and the Lord warned him, sin is crouching at your door, kind of like a lion or something. And now notice the premeditated part of it. It says that let's go out to the field, but what it doesn't tell us is how much time he spent thinking about it. Abel was, he kept flocks, but Cain worked the soil, and so Cain, I'm sure, took him out to one of the areas where he worked the soil and everything, but he had to figure out a way to get him out there. And he had already figured out in his mind that once I get him out there, I'm going to kill him. So that's one of the characteristics of envy, is to resent someone over whatever the reason is. And ironically, in this case, he was resenting him over something that his brother had done right. And his brother did not harm him. Are you beginning to get a picture of how evil, that envy is? Of course, then when it was all at the end, I'm sure he tried to conceal it. He buried him, and he probably buried him really well. But of course, the Lord knew. But Cain, in his distorted reasoning, he probably thought, he probably buried him really well, and nobody will find him, and he. So this is another thing that comes up again and again in the accounts in the Old Testament of people trying to conceal what they've done. So let's look at another one. This will be the second one from the Old Testament. Got to get through this quick. 1 Samuel 18:6. When the men were returning after David had killed the Philistine, in fact, I'm really just going to summarize this. So the first point is David had killed Goliath. Goliath was threatening all the armies of Israel. They were all shaking in their boots, and it was getting so bad that they could have become, servants to the Philistines. So David did a good thing for Saul. But notice what happens. And this is what set Saul off. He runs back, and some of the women from the town, they come out to meet him, and they danced and sang. And they sang this silly little song. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. So number one, Saul was a great warrior himself. He killed thousands of people. But that wasn't good enough, because when he compared himself to David, at least at this point, they were just singing a song. At this point, David probably hadn't killed, tens of thousands. But nonetheless, it made Saul really angry. And So Gary talked this morning about emotions and how we don't think, whenever we're under the control of our emotions, it's like reason goes out the door. And that's kind of what happened with Saul here. It was like he was not thinking. To get so angry over such a trivial thing. So then in verse 17 and also in verse 20, Paul sets about to kill David. But he doesn't want to do it directly. So he thinks, I'll let him marry one of my daughters, and then the Philistines, I'll arrange it in such a way that the Philistines will kill him. And he gave the first one, and then something happened, and he backed out, and David didn't marry her. And then the second time around, Michael, he said, here's a chance, and you can actually be. On the first one, David said, I'm not worthy to be the son of a king, or to marry the king's daughter. And so then on the second one, he said, you can make yourself worthy by going out and killing a bunch of Philistines and proving it, which David did. But meanwhile, Saul all along is thinking David himself's going to get killed when he does this, and that'll take care of the problem. And it's all because somebody said that he killed more people than me. And finally, just notice there in verse 25, last part of the verse, it says Saul's plan was to have David fall at the hands of the Philistines. So the important thing to remember is it's premeditated. People think about it a lot. It's a burning kind of a thing where you're really upset. So one of the first things I want to look at with Jesus, as I mentioned, every time he performed a miracle, they became jealous because of all the great following that came after him. But then, if we go back, what we're going to notice is that they tried to discredit Jesus, and they tried to make him look bad. In Matthew 12, at that time Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath. He answered, haven't you read that David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and he and his companions ate the consecrated bread, which was not lawful for them to do, but only for the priest. Or haven't you read in the law that the priest on Sabbath duty in the temple desecrate the Sabbath, and yet are innocent? I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. If you had known what these words mean, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent, meaning his disciples. So, they wanted to discredit Jesus. They wanted to make him look bad. And so they tried to show by the law, by taking the letter of the law, they tried to show how Jesus was in the wrong. Of course, it backfired on them. They tried this in several ways, and we'll just, we won't get into the other ones where they were just the grain fields. There was another one or two where they tried to trap him. But one of the attributes of envy is to be very judgmental of other people. And here they weren't really concerned about his disciples having, eating grain or plucking the heads of grain on the Sabbath. Their whole motive in bringing this up was to try to trap Jesus and make him look bad. So they used a technicality. They tried to get him on, by the letter of the law. And Jesus came right back to him and he said, David basically did the same thing. And under the circumstance, that was fine. And he ends up by saying, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And if you'd understood that, you would not have condemned my people. So I just wanted to bring in some further teaching from Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount on judging. Because judging is one of those things that can come out when really the root problem is we're envious of someone. In Matthew 7, in verses 1 through 4, do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. And to me, verses 3 through 5 are just so telling of this judgmental kind of an attitude. Because essentially, we're calling somebody out for something, but the very act of what we're doing is 10 times worse than whatever some small thing they did. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye? So sometimes people do have a fault. But you pay no attention to the plank, the huge problem that you have. How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. So there's a whole lesson could be broad, probably several lessons on judgment and righteous judgment, and when we're to judge, when we're to not, and how people stand before God and they're condemned or not before their master. And I'm not going to get into that today, but I just want you to stop and think a while. If you tend to be judgmental, and if you tend to be nitpicky about little specks of dust in other people's eyes, I want you to think about, could I possibly have some envy going on in my life? So, in just a few minutes, I want to talk about safeguards. I thought about calling it antidotes or inoculation, or because envy it's kind of like a disease. But there are some things we can do. One of the first things is contentment. In Philippians 4:11, not that I speak in respect of want, for I've learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. I know both how to be abased and how to abound everywhere and in all things. I am instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So, if we're content with what we have, then we're not going to be envious of what someone else has. Just that one thing in itself will take care of envy. Oh, I actually skipped over. Where's that? Did I skip that one? Anyway, so one of the things about envy is we tend to compare ourselves to others, and we say, they can do this, or they have more than that than I do, but we don't stop to think, I've already, like in Saul's case, he was a successful warrior. He was a great warrior. But yet he looked at David and he saw he was probably a better warrior. And that made him furious. How sad is that? In 2 Corinthians 10 and 12, for we dare not class ourselves or compare ourselves with those who commend themselves. But they, measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves, are not wise. So it's very unwise to start comparing ourselves to other people. And ironically, we will never compare ourselves to someone who has less, and then, because then we'd feel fortunate, right? And I'm being sarcastic here. But if we're in the mindset of comparing ourselves, then we always think of somebody that has more. They excel us in some way, or they have more than us, or they have, the unending list of things that. So I remember when I was growing up, my dad told me, I was pretty small, and I think of course, I was in public school back then, and there was, the issue was defending yourself and taking care of yourself at school and stuff. And Dad said something that I'll never forget. He said, there's, as far as being a tough guy, he says there's always somebody tougher. He said, and so it's better to turn the other cheek and but it struck me because in anything we think about, whether it's, possessions or brains or just anything that we want to think about, capabilities, there's always somebody that honestly is superior to us. And if we really be truthful, there's people that aren't, they don't have it as good. But regardless of which direction we want to go with that, it's unwise to compare ourselves with others because there's just no good that can come from it. And then some of these things that, beauty, for example, somebody may be beautiful or handsome for some period of time, but in Proverbs 31 and 30 it says, charm is deceptive and beauty does not last. But of course, a woman who fears the Lord will be greatly praised. But yet, how many times do we read that? How many girls and women, for example, read that? Beauty is highly praised and highly to be desired in our society. And they would just give anything to be that perfect ideal that that our society paints of beauty. I remember when I was in school, I was never good at sports. I just never had the eye-hand coordination. I really tried, but I don't have it. But yet, I loved watching sports, but in particular, I wanted to be popular, and it seemed like, the kids that were good at sports were popular. And I'm so glad now that that I wasn't good at sports and that I wasn't popular, because who knows what had happened to me. But it was just, at that time, I would have given just about anything to have been good at sports, and I'm just so glad that wasn't possible. It was actually a blessing. And time went by, and in just a few years, all those kids and the popularity and all that, it didn't matter at all. I've never been to a school reunion or any of that stuff. The kids that were popular in high school, who cares? So this is our last one. See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. And when I think of envy, I think of a bitter root, because envy, if you allow it to grow, it will make you bitter, and it'll make you sad, and it'll depress you, and you'll go around with a long face, and it may hurt your health. Bitterness is just a horrible thing, and it's easy. Satan would have us think that somebody's got it better than us, and he really, really wants us to go down that path. So I just hope that each one of us will look at maybe some of our tendencies and really, it's the first day of the week, and we come together to examine ourselves as we gather around the table. And as we examine our lives and we examine our hearts and our motive, look deep in there and see, am I judgmental? Do I go around thinking about other people and, comparing myself to them, thinking about how some have it better than I do? Because if we do, we really need to stop it, because it's like a cancer, and it'll ultimately cost us our soul. So, sorry for a negative lesson, but I think it needed to be taught on. I don't think I've ever heard a lesson on it in 50 years or whatever. I can't remember hearing one on them. Gary mentioned it several times this morning, and a lot of times we do mention the word envy, but as far as going into what it really means and how it might could apply to me, not so much. Anyway, I hope this lesson has been helpful, and if there's one who would like to pray for the church, or if there's one who would like to become a member, we'd ask you to come as we stand and sing.